With that, Chair recognizes Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In Iranian political and terror ethos, there's the near enemy, Israel, but there's also the far enemy, the United States of America. The topic of this hearing is Iranian terror operations on the American soil. So I commend my colleague, Jeff Duncan, for his bipartisan resolution to include as an area of focus the Western Hemisphere in our nation's counterterrorism efforts. I think it's very, very important. Hezbollah, the Party of God, is a Shia terrorist group highly committed to violent jihad. Hezbollah acts as a proxy, as a pawn, as a tool for Venezuela, Syria, and Iran. Hezbollah has a presence estimated to be between a few hundred to a few thousand in the 16-country region of Latin America. Hezbollah also has a presence in 15 American cities, including 4 major cities in Canada. We were told at previous hearings that while the confirmation of Hezbollah's presence in North America is indisputable, that we shouldn't worry, that they're just here for fundraising activities. Hezbollah, a terror group committed to violent jihad, I don't make the distinction between fundraising and terrorist activity. Fundraising for terrorist activity is a terrorist activity. I represent Buffalo, New York, and I know from terrorist history, terrorist cowards look for high-impact targets. We have the Peace Bridge that connects Buffalo in southern Ontario, the busiest northern border crossing for passenger vehicles in North America, third busiest for commercial vehicles. We have Niagara Falls, a destination of millions of people every single year. We have 90 miles away Toronto, a multicultural, fascinating international city. We also have in close proximity the Niagara Power Project, which produces the cheapest, cleanest, and most electricity in all of New York State. I'd like you to comment, consistent with the hearing's topic, Iranian terror operations on the American soil, be it Iran directly or their proxies who do their dirty work for them, and what more can we be doing about their presence, their direct presence in 15 American cities and 4 major Canadian cities, generally in North America?
Well, I in particular am grateful for the question because I'm completing a book on Hezbollah's global presence, which has several chapters on Hezbollah in South America and North America. So I know at least one person will now read it. I'm going to take that giggle as two. Now you got to buy it too. It's more than 15 cities in the U.S. and more in foreign Canada. Several years ago, in written answers to follow-up questions and congressional testimony, FBI officials conceded that they see Hezbollah doing more than fundraising in this country. They see Hezbollah doing pre-operational surveillance in this country. They believe that that is primarily done for the purpose of vetting new recruits. But if I were a terrorist mastermind vetting a new recruit here whose primary responsibility would be fundraising and logistics, there'd be other ways to make sure that this person was a capable fundraiser other than having them surveil U.S. federal buildings. I think one of the greatest surprises about this, our Bobsiar plot, is that the Quds Force was doing this apparently on their own, whereas usually they are doing things together with Lebanese Hezbollah. That certainly has been the MO in the Western Hemisphere in Argentina. It was the MO earlier in 1994, a few months before the Amiya bombing in Thailand, an attempted bombing of the Israeli embassy there. It was thwarted not because of anything counterterrorism officials did, but because the bomber got into a car accident, and in many, many other cases. That may suggest that their current capabilities here aren't so high. Again, as I noted in my testimony, Quds Force and Hezbollah both have faced a series of failures since 2008, when they tried to resurrect Hezbollah, that is, tried to resurrect what had been a nascent foreign terrorist operations capability in the wake of the assassination of Imad Mugniya. But we do need to be concerned about this, and we do need to be concerned about the crossings between, not just to our south, but to our north. In the one case we know of, Kourani, of a Hezbollah guy who had actual training, who was smuggled across the border from Mexico, then had connections in Canada as well. Fauzi Ayoub, who was arrested trying to carry out a bombing in Israel, had Canadian citizenship and traveled on a false U.S. passport, married an American woman, and an indictment was recently released for him in the Dearborn area, which was his last known address. And there's a lot of movement across the bridges, more in the Michigan area, but I'm sure in yours as well. And this is something we need to be cognizant of. The good news is, and I say this not just because I came originally when I came to this town working for FBI, but based on the research I've done for the book, I have been tremendously impressed. And I've gone out and met with field offices and local police and others, FBI, DEA, JTTFs. The work that they're doing, focused on Hezbollah in particular, is impressive.
I'd just make a very quick comment. The Hezbollah is vastly more comfortable with the expatriate Lebanese Shia population than the Iranians are with their expatriate population. The interesting exception to that might be in Canada, because in Canada you have what I would call the second generation of Iranian immigration. You have much more devout communities, communities which are much closer to the folks back home. They exist almost in ghettos in Canada, which is something you don't see almost anywhere else with the Iranian expatriate communities. So the Iranians are naturally going there, and that's why they sent someone like Sadiq Lahijani, one of the brothers of perhaps the most famous family in Iran, to there to be, quote, a cultural attaché. The Hezbollah has, and there's no way around it, has had a certain prestige amongst the Lebanese Shia community, even with Lebanese Shia who ideologically are not in sympathy with the Hezbollah. And it's a problem. And it's just a problem that you have to be aware of. And that's why the Hezbollah is much more effective maneuvering overseas than the Iranians are.